She was only 6 when she screamed, "The brakes don't work!" and saved her millionaire father's life. What no one knew was that the stepmother had planned it all, and the little girl had been secretly watching for weeks. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Reeves estate, pouring golden light across the polished marble floors. The mansion sat atop a hill outside of San Francisco, a fortress of luxury, elegance, and silence. Alexander Reeves stood in his private study, looking out over the gardens below, coffee cooling in his hand, his face unreadable. From a distance, he looked like the kind of man who had everything: wealth, success, power. But behind his carefully composed expression was something far more fragile, a heart still mending from a wound that had never fully healed. He was only 30, yet the world already knew him as a business prodigy. His name graced magazine covers. His company, a global tech empire, was the engine behind half of Silicon Valley. But the man behind the empire hadn't smiled fully in years. 6 years ago, his wife, Isabel, had died giving birth to their daughter. Her death had left a silence in his life that not even time could soften. At first, grief consumed him. Then came the numbness. He had thrown himself into work, into control, into perfecting every aspect of his public image. But at home, in the spaces where laughter should have lived, there was only stillness, except for one voice: Lily. His daughter had saved him from disappearing entirely. At 6 years old, she was the light in his world, the reason he breathed. Her brown eyes, just like his, were full of curiosity and kindness. Her hair, soft and pale like her mother's, glowed in the sunlight when she ran through the garden. She had grown up mostly with nannies and tutors, but he had always made time for her, no matter the meeting, no matter the deal. She was the one thread connecting him to something real. But even love didn't protect her from what came next. 2 years ago, Alexander had met Jasmine at a charity gala. She had appeared suddenly, dazzling, magnetic, bold. She had the kind of beauty that turned heads and the confidence to match. She was 25, intelligent, well-spoken, and moved through his world with practiced ease. Within months, they were engaged. Within the year, married. To the outside world, it was a perfect second chance. The successful widower finding love again. The media adored the narrative, but inside the house, the picture was far from perfect. Jasmine and Lily never connected. Jasmine never outright mistreated the child, but she kept her distance. Her smiles felt forced, her affection rehearsed. Alexander noticed at first, but Jasmine always had an explanation. She needed time. She was trying. She wanted space to become a stepmother at her own pace. He wanted to believe her, but Lily felt it in her bones. The coldness, the tension, the way Jasmine looked through her instead of at her. And Lily, bright as she was, said nothing. She watched, she listened, and she started to see things no one else did. Late-night whispers, locked doors, phone calls and hushed voices. A man, unfamiliar, sharp-eyed, always waiting in a black car a few streets away. And so she turned to the one person in the house who never looked away: George, the gardener. He was in his 60s, with sun-worn hands, a gentle voice, and a quiet wisdom. Lily adored him. He taught her how to plant flowers, how to feed the birds, how to listen to the wind, and George adored her back. So when she came to him one afternoon, clutching her stuffed rabbit and whispering, "I think something's wrong with Jasmine," he didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. He knelt beside her and said gently, "Tell me everything." And she did. At first it sounded like a child's imagination. But then came the details: specific times, names, descriptions of conversations she had overheard, words like inheritance and accident. George's gut twisted. He'd seen people like Jasmine before. Too polished, too perfect, eyes that never softened even when they smiled. He told Lily they would watch together. He showed her how to use the small digital camera he had in his shed. He told her where to place it. She called it their secret mission. They became a team, detective and sidekick. And soon the footage came in. It was faint, muffled, but enough. Voices that didn't belong. Jasmine and a man standing near the garage at night. A conversation that chilled George to the bone. "I'm telling you, it'll look like an accident. He's got that old car he still loves. I know the one. All I have to do is get under the panel, cut the brakes, one drive into the city and boom, It's done. He's out of the picture, and we get everything. You and me. George stared at the footage for a long time before calling Lily over. You were right, he said, eyes dark. What do we do? She asked. George looked at her. Small, brave, 6 years old and full of fire. We stop her, he said. And somewhere in that moment, beneath the roses in the summer sky, a plan began to form. A plan that would take courage, timing, and a heart braver than most adults ever find. And Lily Reeves, the little girl who had already saved her father once by simply being born, was ready to do it again. In the days that followed, Lily became someone entirely different from the wide-eyed, soft-spoken child her father had always known. She still played in the garden, still twirled in the sunlight and chased butterflies. But her eyes were sharper now, her movements more careful. She had a mission, a secret, and it lived like a heartbeat beneath everything she did. George had told her gently but firmly that they couldn't go to her father just yet. Not without real proof, not when the person they were accusing was his wife, a woman the world still saw as his devoted partner. Adults, George had said quietly, sometimes won't see what's right in front of them until you put it in their hands and force them to look. So Lily continued watching. Jasmine grew bolder with each passing day. Perhaps she thought she had fooled them all. She smiled a little wider, wore more expensive dresses, took longer calls in the garden while pretending to water plants she couldn't name. But Lily and George had already moved the camera. And they had audio now, too. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, George played the newest recording in his small tool shed. Lily sat beside him, legs swinging off the edge of the bench, holding her stuffed rabbit tightly in her arms. On the recording, Jasmine's voice was clear. "You're sure you can do it this week?" she whispered. A man's voice replied, low and rough. "I've got the tools, it won't take long. He never checks under the hood." "And no mistakes this time?" "None. He goes for his morning meeting Friday. I'll take care of it Thursday night." Jasmine let out a breath. "Good. I'm done waiting." George paused the recording. Lily looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "They're really going to do it," she whispered. George nodded. "They are. But not if we stop them first." That night, Lily pretended to be asleep when Jasmine came into her room. The woman lingered at the door for a moment, eyes cold and unreadable, before turning away. Lily didn't move. She waited until the house was silent. Then she slipped out of bed, crept barefoot down the hallway, and into George's quarters near the greenhouse. The plan was simple but risky. George would keep watch near the garage Thursday night. He would record everything. Lily would stay close by, just in case Jasmine or her lover tried anything unexpected. And if something went wrong, if anything at all felt dangerous, they would call Alexander immediately, no matter the hour. But things rarely go exactly as planned. On Thursday evening, Jasmine announced over dinner that she'd arranged for Alexander's favorite car, a vintage black Jaguar, to be cleaned and ready for his big day tomorrow. She said it sweetly, her hand resting on his arm, her smile practiced and perfectly placed. Alexander only nodded, distracted by an incoming work message. Lily sat across the table watching everything. Her father had no idea. Later that night, while the house settled into silence, Lily waited in the shadows near the rose bushes. She wore dark clothes and carried her small flashlight, clipped with red film to avoid detection. George was already positioned behind the garage, camera in hand. Then the sound came, the quiet creak of the garage side door. Jasmine slipped inside, followed closely by the man Lily had seen before. Tall, unshaven, wearing gloves. George began filming. Lily crept closer. Inside the garage, Jasmine's voice rang out softly. "This is it. Don't take too long." The man crouched by the car. Metal clicked. A panel opened. Tools clinked in the dark. Lily's heart pounded. Then she stepped backward, and her heel snapped a twig. The sound was small but unmistakable in the silence. Inside the garage, the man froze. Jasmine hissed, "What was that?" George waved frantically to Lily from his hiding place. But it was too late. The man stormed out of the garage, eyes scanning the yard. Lily dropped flat onto the grass. He came within feet of her, breathing hard, then shook his head. "Probably a raccoon." Jasmine reappeared behind him. "Forget it. Just finish." They vanished back inside. George exhaled. Lily scrambled to his side, her knees shaking. But the footage was clear. The audio captured every word, every threat. The proof was real. At dawn, George handed the flash drive to Lily in a tiny metal case. "You give this to your father," he said. "Don't let anyone stop you." Lily nodded. But when morning came, and Alexander stepped into the garage, briefcase in hand, ready for his routine meeting downtown, Lily froze. He smiled at her as he passed through the hallway, kissed the top of her head, and said, "Wish me luck, Peanut." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She stood there trembling. Then she saw Jasmine behind him, watching her, and something in Lily's chest snapped. She turned and ran, not to George, not to the phone, to the driveway. She burst outside barefoot, sprinting across the gravel as the Jaguar's engine roared to life. "Daddy!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "The brakes don't work. Stop. Don't go." Alexander's eyes met hers through the windshield. Time slowed, and then everything began to fall apart. Alexander's foot slammed down on the brake pedal, hard. Nothing happened. His heart instantly jumped into his throat as the car continued rolling forward, gathering speed. It didn't make sense. He had just started the engine. The driveway wasn't even sloped. But the pedal, it sank to the floor, lifeless, offering no resistance. No slowing. Just silence. He gripped the steering wheel, wide-eyed, his mind calculating in milliseconds. The gate at the end of the driveway was still closed. Beyond it, a sharp hill led down toward the road. If he didn't stop the car, he would crash. Or worse. Then came Lily's voice again, screaming, "The brakes don't work!" It wasn't just a guess. It was a warning. It was knowledge. Alexander didn't wait. He wrenched the wheel left and yanked the door handle. The car veered, tires screeching against the driveway gravel, and he threw himself out. Arms up to shield his head, body twisting midair to avoid the pavement. He hit the ground hard. His shoulder cracked painfully against the stones. Air rushed out of his lungs. For a split second, the world turned white, ringing with a high-pitched hum. But then he heard it. The sickening crunch of metal as the Jaguar collided with a thick oak tree near the garden's edge. The front end crumpled inward like paper. A plume of smoke burst from the hood. Lily was already running toward him. "Daddy!" she cried, barefoot, the hem of her nightgown fluttering as she stumbled across the grass. He groaned and sat up, pain shooting through his side, but nothing broken. He turned just in time to catch her in his arms as she flung herself at him. She was crying, clinging to him, repeating, "I told you! I told you! I told you!" He held her tightly, trying to catch his breath. "You did," he whispered. "You saved me." Footsteps thundered behind them. George appeared from the back garden, a phone already in his hand. "I called the police," he said breathlessly. "They're on their way." Behind them, the front door of the house flew open. Jasmine stood there in her robe, hair tousled like she had just woken up. She looked from the wrecked car to Alexander, then to Lily. Her face went pale. "What happened?" she asked too quickly. Alexander didn't answer. He was staring at her now, not as her husband, but as a man putting the pieces together. Her sudden suggestion to drive that car, her overly sweet behavior the night before, and now this, her tone, too concerned, too rehearsed. And then Lily did something he hadn't expected. She stepped forward, small and furious, and held out a silver flash drive in her little hand. "She tried to hurt you," Lily said, voice shaking but clear. "Her and that man. They were in the garage last night. George helped me film it." Jasmine froze. "Lily," she said slowly, a chill slipping into her voice. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you," Lily said louder. "You told him to cut the brakes." George nodded, pulling a copy of the footage from his coat pocket. "It's all here. Voices, faces, enough to put both of you away." Alexander stood up, steadying himself on Lily's shoulder. His eyes never left Jasmine. Something inside him, something long silenced by hope, by denial, finally snapped awake. "You tried to kill me," he said. "No," Jasmine gasped, suddenly pale. "No, Alex, I didn't. That's insane. She's just a child." But it was too late. The sound of sirens echoed through the trees, growing louder by the second. Jasmine looked toward the road, toward the open field behind the garden, her body tense like an animal deciding whether to flee. "Don't," Alexander warned. She bolted anyway. But George moved faster than anyone expected. Despite his age, he caught her by the wrist before she reached the side gate and yanked her backward. She fell hard to the ground, screaming, hair flying as she flailed. Two police cruisers arrived seconds later. Officers rushed forward. Jasmine was handcuffed while still shouting, now incoherent, desperate, wild. She cursed George. She cried out to Alexander, pleading, but he said nothing. He just pulled Lily into his arms and turned away. They didn't see the moment Jasmine locked eyes with Lily one last time. But Lily saw it. Cold. Hatred. The look of someone who had underestimated a little girl and lost everything. An hour later, the house was quiet again. The wrecked car had been towed. Jasmine and her accomplice, who had been found hiding in a rental car a few streets away, were both in custody. The detectives had taken the flash drives, interviewed George, and gently thanked Lily for her bravery. Now Alexander sat on the edge of Lily's bed, her small hand tucked in his. "You were so brave," he whispered. "Braver than most adults I know." She blinked up at him. "I didn't want you to die." He felt his throat close. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You saved my life, Lily. You saved everything." She smiled a little, the fear finally melting from her eyes. Outside her window, the first light of morning touched the sky, pink and gold against the trees. And inside that room, something stronger than betrayal had taken root. A bond. One not even death could break. The morning after the crash dawned clear and quiet, but inside the Reeves estate, nothing felt normal. The house, once a place of routine and precision, had become something else entirely. Police tape fluttered across the garage entrance. Jasmine's belongings were being inventoried by investigators. Reporters were already gathering at the gates. But none of that touched the core of what Alexander was feeling. He sat in his study with the doors closed, sunlight slanting in through the tall windows, his hand resting on a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. The footage had been reviewed, the evidence undeniable. Jasmine, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had welcomed into his home, had tried to murder him for money, and his daughter, his 6-year-old daughter, had saved him. He kept replaying the image in his mind. Lily running barefoot down the driveway, her voice cutting through the quiet morning like a siren. "The brakes don't work!" That cry had been the line between life and death, and he had nearly ignored it. How had he not seen it sooner? He had known something wasn't right. Jasmine had been distant, strange, manipulative, but he had explained it away. Stress, adjustment, the awkwardness of becoming a stepmother to a grieving child. He had chosen to believe what was comfortable rather than what was true. But Lily had seen it, and instead of being afraid, she had acted. There was a knock at the door. He turned to see George standing there, holding 2 mugs of tea. Alexander motioned for him to enter. George set the tea down and didn't speak right away. He sat across from Alexander, his posture steady, his face unreadable. "I owe you more than I can say," Alexander said finally. "You believed her. You protected her. You protected me." George shook his head slowly. "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done if you'd seen what I saw. That little girl, she didn't hesitate. She trusted her instincts. She trusted me. That kind of courage doesn't come from nowhere." Alexander's jaw tensed. "I let her down." "No," George said, firm but gentle. "You loved her. You gave her everything you thought she needed. You just didn't know what danger looked like in your own home." Alexander dropped his gaze. "I let that woman into her life. I brought poison into our house. You were grieving. People make mistakes when they're lonely. The point is, you listened when it mattered. You heard Lily's voice. You jumped." "I almost didn't." "But you did," George said, "and you're still here." "Because of her," Alexander swallowed hard. "I want to make it right." "Then start now." Later that afternoon, he found Lily in the greenhouse. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to a tray of tiny pots, helping George plant sunflower seeds. Her bunny lay beside her. Her hands were covered in soil, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up when she saw him and smiled. Small but real. "Hi, Daddy." He crouched down beside her, gently brushing a bit of dirt from her cheek. "Hi, my love." She went back to planting without saying more. Alexander just watched her, marveling at how unchanged she looked, and yet how deeply she had changed everything. The bravery she had shown, the intuition, the steadiness. She was 6. 6. and she had held his life in her hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. After a few minutes, she said quietly, "Is she gone?" "Yes," he replied. "She's not coming back." "Good." Lily pressed her finger into the soil. "She didn't like flowers." He gave a soft laugh. "No, I don't think she did." Lily glanced at him. "Are you mad at me?" He froze. "Mad? Lily, no, never. Why would you think that?" Her voice was small. "Because I didn't tell you sooner." Alexander pulled her into his lap, not caring that her hands were still dirty. He held her close, his lips brushing the top of her head. "You told me exactly when you were ready, and you were brave. So much braver than I was." She leaned into him, burying her face in his chest. "I didn't want to lose you too." The words hit him harder than he expected. He held her tighter. "You won't," he whispered. "You'll never lose me. I'm here. I'm always here." For the first time in a long time, the stillness in the house felt different. Not cold, not hollow, but safe. Later that evening, Alexander met with his lawyer and the head of his security team. He gave clear instructions. Jasmine's access to the estate, accounts, and any legal authority she'd been granted was to be terminated immediately. Her accomplice was being formally charged with attempted murder. The footage George had gathered would be submitted directly to the district attorney. Alexander wasn't a man who took revenge, but he would protect what mattered. And what mattered now was Lily. That night, after Lily fell asleep, he sat by her bed for a long time, watching the slow rise and fall of her breath. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of just how much weight she had carried on her tiny shoulders. He tucked the covers around her a little tighter, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something new, a gold chain with a small locket. Inside, on one side, was a photo of her mother. On the other, one of the three of them, Alexander, Lily, and George, taken in the garden just a few weeks before. He placed it gently on her nightstand, a promise of who she was, of who he would now be, and of everything they still had left to build together. The news spread quickly. Within 24 hours of Jasmine's arrest, headlines erupted across local and national media outlets. Millionaire CEO's wife behind murder plot. Stepdaughter's heroic warning saves father's life. Reeves family scandal, betrayal behind the gates. Reporters camped outside the estate gates. Drones buzzed over the gardens, and camera crews jostled each other for a glimpse of Alexander Reeves or his daughter. But inside the Reeves estate, there was no chaos, only a quiet kind of survival. Alexander had immediately put out a brief public statement through his legal team. It was factual, calm, and carefully worded. It acknowledged the attempted crime, expressed gratitude to the police, and emphasized his commitment to healing and privacy for his daughter. But behind the professional front, the emotional weight pressed heavily on him. He didn't return to the office that week, nor the one after. Instead, he stayed home, with Lily. They began rebuilding their world, one slow, deliberate day at a time. Each morning started the same. Breakfast in the sunroom, oatmeal, fresh fruit, pancakes on good days. George would already be tending the garden, waving at them through the windows. Lily, now slightly clingier than usual, always sat next to Alexander, sometimes resting her head on his shoulder, sometimes just holding his sleeve. She didn't say much about Jasmine anymore, but he could tell. The fear hadn't left her completely. Neither had his. One afternoon, they sat on the couch with her photo album. The early pages were filled with her mother, Isabel, glowing, beautiful, laughing. There was a picture of the hospital when Lily was born, then her first birthday party, then a long pause in the album where grief had silenced joy for a time. Then slowly, photos of her and Alexander resumed. Trips to the zoo, bedtime reading, him holding her hand at school orientation. But Jasmine appeared in some of the more recent pages, and when Lily saw those, her face changed. She pointed at one where Jasmine was hugging her, or rather pretending to. "Can I take that one out?" she asked quietly. Alexander looked at the photo for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, you can take out anything you don't want in your book." Lily peeled it away and set it aside. They didn't say anything after that. They didn't need to. Later, George helped Lily plant a rose bush near the west wall of the garden. It was a new rose, a brilliant gold color. She named it Sunheart. For people who are brave, she said matter-of-factly, even when they're small. Alexander watched from the terrace. He hadn't known such pride could feel this quiet, this full. His daughter had faced something that would terrify adults, and she had stood her ground. She had spoken up. She had saved his life. That evening, when Lily had gone to bed, he sat alone in the study with George. I keep asking myself, Alexander said slowly, how I missed it, how I let her that close. You were human, George replied. You wanted to believe in something new. That's not weakness, Alex, that's hope. Alexander let out a dry laugh. Hope almost killed me. George's gaze didn't waver. But love saved you. The words hung in the air for a long time. Alexander looked out the window toward Lily's room. The light was still on. Her bunny sat in the window, facing the stars. I was building the wrong kind of life, he said. The house, the money, the appearances. I thought if I could fix the outside, the inside would follow. And now? George asked. Alexander took a deep breath. Now I want to build something real. For her. With her he paused, then turned to George. And I want you to stay, not just as the gardener, as family. She needs you. So do I. George looked away for a moment, clearing his throat, emotion tightening his expression. You don't owe me anything, he said. I'm not offering out of debt, Alexander replied. I'm offering because you're one of the only people who's ever protected her like I should have. George nodded slowly, blinking hard. Then I'll stay. A few days later, they took Lily to the ocean. It was her first time seeing it, really seeing it. The way her face lit up at the sight of the endless blue, the way her bare feet dug into the sand, the way she laughed as Alexander chased her down the shoreline. It was more healing than any therapy session could have provided. That night, as the sun sank low and cast orange fire across the waves, Lily sat wrapped in a blanket between Alexander and George. She leaned her head against her father's arm and looked up at the sky. Do you think Mommy can see us from heaven? She asked softly. Alexander didn't answer right away. His throat was tight. I think she never stops watching you, he said finally. And I think she's very proud. Lily smiled, her eyes half closed with sleep. I hope she knows I was brave. Alexander kissed the top of her head. She knows, he whispered. She knows everything. And in that quiet, fading light, the three of them sat together, not as broken survivors of something dark, but as a new kind of family, forged in fire, rooted in truth, and bound forever by love that refused to be silenced. The morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter as Lily sat perched on a tall stool, her small hands wrapped around a warm mug of cocoa. The marshmallows had already begun to melt. Alexander stood across from her at the stove, trying his best to flip pancakes without making a mess. An effort that earned him quiet giggles from his daughter every time he dropped one or flipped it wrong. It was a new ritual, unpolished, imperfect, but deeply treasured. It had been a month since the accident, since the day everything changed. And while the world outside still tried to catch up, with court dates, media speculation, and the steady drumbeat of attention, inside the Reeves home, something resembling peace had begun to bloom. Jasmine had been denied bail. Her trial was set for the following month. Her lover, now identified as a con man with a long list of priors, had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for testimony. The prosecutors had more than enough evidence, thanks to the footage Lily and George had recorded. The case was solid. The story no longer needed to be repeated, and Alexander no longer answered reporters' questions. His world had narrowed, focused entirely on one little girl and the life he now realized he had nearly lost. After breakfast, Lily ran outside with George to tend to her sunflowers, which had already grown tall and leaned slightly toward the morning sky. Alexander stayed behind to clean the kitchen, but found himself pausing at the table, staring at the open notebook Lily had left behind. In her careful handwriting, letters still uncertain but full of intention, she had written, Today I planted 4 more seeds. I hope they grow strong. I think they will. I named them after people I love. She had drawn tiny flowers beneath the sentence, 4 of them, labeled Daddy, George, Mommy, and me. He stared at the names, his heart tight in his chest. Later that day, Alexander met with his estate lawyer. The meeting was short and decisive. Jasmine's name was removed from every property, account, and legal standing. Her marriage to Alexander was formally annulled on the grounds of attempted murder. Everything she had touched, every trace of her in his will, in his finances, in his home, was erased. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. The infection had to be fully cut away before healing could begin. That evening, as the sky shifted into pale orange, Alexander and Lily sat together on the back steps of the house. George had already gone inside, leaving them with the quiet hum of crickets and the warm scent of freshly watered earth. Lily rested her head on her father's shoulder. She hadn't said much all day, content just to be near him. But now in the hush of twilight, she spoke. "Will she come back?" Alexander tensed. "No," he said softly. "She's not coming back." Lily was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Good." Another pause. "Why did she want to hurt you?" Alexander hesitated. How could he explain greed and cruelty to a 6-year-old girl without planting seeds of fear in her heart? "She thought she could take something that didn't belong to her," he said carefully, "and she thought no one would stop her." Lily looked up at him. "But I did." He turned to her, his face filled with something between awe and heartbreak. "Yes," he said, "you did. You saved me." She leaned against him again. "I wasn't even scared. Not really. I just knew it was the right thing." He closed his eyes for a second, fighting back the emotion. "I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." They stayed like that until the stars began to show, one by one. Lily eventually dozed off, her head heavy on his chest, her bunny nestled in her lap. Alexander carried her to bed, tucked her in, and sat with her for a while, just listening to her breathing. In the hallway outside her room, he paused. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. It felt peaceful, safe. That night, he returned to his office and opened his personal journal, something he hadn't touched in over a year. He turned to a blank page and began to write. Not about business or deals or legal battles, but about Lily, about her bravery, her laughter, her questions, her resilience. He wrote about George, about quiet loyalty, about the quiet ways people save each other. He wrote about Isabel, not as a ghost in his past, but as a thread in their story, still present in their daughter's eyes and her strength in the life she was now helping him rebuild. He wrote about family, not the kind that exists on paper or in photographs, but the kind forged in fire and truth. When he finished, he closed the book gently and leaned back in his chair. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he exhaled without tension. The house was quiet. The world could wait. And in that silence, Alexander Reeves, once a lonely man with a perfect life and a hollow heart, finally began to understand what it meant to be whole. The days rolled into summer, warm and slow, as the chaos of the past began to melt into something quieter, not forgotten, but folded neatly into the background of their lives. In the weeks following Jasmine's arrest, a stillness settled over the Reeves estate, a kind of emotional detangling. Though there were occasional phone calls from the press and the last few legal matters to be resolved, the energy within the house had shifted. It no longer pulsed with unease. It breathed. Lily had stopped asking if Jasmine would come back. She had stopped waking in the middle of the night, calling out from her room with fear in her voice. Now she called softly for her father, just to make sure he was there. And Alexander always was, without fail. Each night after stories and warm milk and brushing her hair, she would whisper, "Will you be here when I wake up?" And every night he would kiss her forehead and answer, "Always." And he meant it. One warm Thursday morning, George pulled the old pickup around the front of the estate. Lily, already dressed in her favorite blue sundress, ran barefoot down the steps holding a sun hat in one hand and her bunny in the other. "Are we really going?" she shouted. Alexander followed close behind, sunglasses in place and a grin spreading across his face. "A promise is a promise." They were going to the stables. Weeks ago, when Lily had first started recovering from the trauma, she mentioned a wish, to ride a horse. She'd never done it before, but she said it with so much light in her eyes, Alexander knew it had to happen. He made the arrangements quietly, not a luxury stable with marble floors and photographers, but a real one. A simple family-run farm just outside Napa Valley, with wide fields and kind animals. As the truck pulled up to the barn, Lily pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass. Horses grazed in the pastures, tails swishing, heads dipping lazily in the summer air. "They're real," she whispered. George smiled, tipping his hat. "Told you so." The owner of the stables, a kind older woman named Claire, greeted them warmly. She knelt to Lily's level, introduced her to a caramel-colored pony named Marigold, and explained everything with the patient joy of someone who loved children and knew their hearts carried weight. They let Lily feed Marigold first, slices of apple, carrots, bits of sugar cubes. Then they brushed her mane, braided it with tiny blue ribbons. And then slowly, with Claire's help, Lily mounted the pony. Alexander stood by the fence, arms crossed, barely breathing. And then, just like that, she was riding. Not far, just small, gentle circles at first, but the look on her face, absolute freedom, absolute trust, was everything. Alexander felt something inside him loosen. His daughter had nearly died trying to save him. She had carried fear for weeks, fear no child should have to shoulder. And now here she was, 6 years old and galloping in slow, wobbly circles with her eyes lit up like the sun. She was healing. He was too. After the ride, they picnicked under a willow tree. George spread out a blanket, and they unpacked sandwiches and lemonade. Lily kicked off her shoes and lay down with her bunny tucked under one arm, her head resting on her father's lap. "Daddy," she said sleepily. "Yes? Are we going to be okay forever now?" He didn't answer right away. Not because he doubted, but because the question carried such innocence and such depth. "Yes," he said finally. "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be happy." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted off into a soft nap as birds chirped overhead and the breeze whispered through the tall grass. When they returned home that evening, the house felt different again. Lighter, warmer. George started dinner, and Alexander helped Lily change into pajamas. She told him every detail about the pony, how soft her ears were, how she didn't even flinch when a butterfly landed on her nose, how Claire said she could come back anytime. Alexander tucked her in, kissed her goodnight, and whispered, "You were amazing today." "I wasn't scared," she whispered. "I know," he said. "You're the bravest person I've ever known." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Alexander stood at the window in his study, looking out at the stars. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, sat at the head of boardrooms full of people who waited for his every word. But none of it had ever brought him what this quiet moment did, the knowledge that he was truly needed, that he was someone's safe place, a father, and finally, completely, a man who understood what it meant to live not for legacy, but for love. Summer gradually folded into the softer light of early autumn. The air was still warm during the day, but cooler winds now whispered through the trees in the evening, rustling the golden leaves just beginning to fall. The Reeves estate, once filled with silence and tension, had taken on a new rhythm. Gentle, grounded, full of laughter in places where there had once been walls. On the outside, the media had moved on. Jasmine's trial had come and gone. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts, attempted murder, conspiracy, endangerment of a minor. She and her accomplice were sentenced to decades in prison. For the world, it was a headline that had passed. For Alexander and Lily, it was closure. Final. Necessary. Inside the estate, however, something else was unfolding. A rebirth. That morning, Lily sat cross-legged in the garden, the sun warming her shoulders as she carefully tied a note to the stem of her sunflower. Her handwriting was small and a little uneven, but the message was clear. "Thank you for growing with me." George stood nearby with a watering can, smiling. He'd been doing less of the work and more of the teaching lately. Lily was now in charge of her own patch of the garden. Her sunflowers had flourished, bright and tall, reaching higher than anyone had expected, just like her. Inside the house, Alexander was finishing up something he'd been working on in secret. He sat at his desk, carefully slipping a small letter into an envelope. On the front, written in simple gold ink, were the words, "For Lily, on the day we begin again." That day was today. He called for her just after lunch. She came inside with grass on her knees and a smile on her face, cheeks flushed from chasing butterflies. He asked her to sit with him in the library, the room that had once been for business calls and long hours of loneliness. Now it smelled like lemon oil and old paper, and the fireplace had already been lit in anticipation of fall. He handed her the envelope. Lily opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a small silver key. She looked up at him, puzzled. "What's this?" He smiled. "Read the letter first." She unfolded the paper and read it aloud, slowly, her voice clear and thoughtful. "Dear Lily, you are the bravest, strongest, kindest person I know. You have faced things no child should have to face, and you did it with courage and love. You protected me when I didn't know I needed protecting. You reminded me what really matters. This key is for the treehouse in the East Orchard. I've had it rebuilt, stronger, safer, with your favorite colors inside and a window just for watching the stars. It's your space now, a place that belongs only to you, a place to dream, to read, to think, to just be, because you deserve that. And because I love you more than words can say." Dad, by the time she finished reading, Lily was already crying, though she tried to blink the tears away. "A treehouse?" she asked in disbelief. "For me?" "For you," he said. "You said once that you wished you had a place to feel big, even though you were small. I never forgot that." She flung herself into his arms, the letter clutched in her hand, the key pressed into her palm. He held her tightly, resting his chin on her hair, and for a long moment, neither of them said a word. Later that afternoon, they walked together to the east side of the property. The old treehouse that had once belonged to Alexander as a boy had been completely redone. New beams, a fresh ladder, sturdy windows. Inside, there were soft pillows, bookshelves, twinkle lights, and a writing desk by the round window that faced west. On the far wall, there was a hand-painted sign that simply read, "Lily's Sky." She spent hours there reading, rearranging her stuffed animals, writing new journal entries. Alexander and George sat on the grass below, watching her silhouette through the window. There was a lightness in her now, something free, unburdened. That evening, they had dinner outside under the stars. A fire crackled in the outdoor pit, and fairy lights glowed along the garden path. They roasted marshmallows, shared stories, and toasted with sparkling cider. Lily made a toast herself. "To family," she said, lifting her glass. "To family," Alexander echoed, his voice full of something steady and deep. George raised his glass too. "To brave hearts and second chances." As the fire burned low and Lily fell asleep on Alexander's shoulder, he stared up at the stars, feeling more alive than he ever had in boardrooms, more present than he ever had behind a desk. Everything he thought he wanted in life, power, prestige, wealth, had never filled the hollow space inside him. But now, sitting in the garden with his daughter, safe in his arms, the night warm and quiet around them, he understood. This was his legacy, not headlines, not empires, but love. Lily stirred slightly in her sleep, murmured something about her bunny, and snuggled closer. Alexander kissed her forehead, wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and smiled. They had made it through the storm, and tomorrow they would rise again, together. The ending of this story isn't just about justice being served. It's about healing taking root where pain once lived. What began as a tale of betrayal, manipulation, and unthinkable danger evolved into something much deeper. A story about the quiet, life-saving power of love, loyalty, and a child's courage. Lily's journey is what transforms this story from a thriller into something timeless. She's not just a victim or a plot device, she's the hero. A 6-year-old girl who sees the truth, chooses to act, and becomes the emotional center of a family that nearly fell apart. Her bravery doesn't come from superpowers or training. It comes from instinct, heart, and the belief that her voice matters. And she was right. Alexander's arc, too, is powerful. A man who had everything, yet nearly lost what truly mattered because he was too wrapped in image and grief. His redemption doesn't come through revenge or courtroom victory. It comes through presence, through learning to show up, to listen, to become a father not in name, but in choice every single day. And George, the quiet, steady force in the background, reminds us that family isn't always blood. Sometimes the people who protect us the most are the ones who've simply chosen to love us. The story ends not with noise, but with stillness. A treehouse, a letter, a toast, not to wealth or success, but to family, brave hearts, and second chances. In a world so often focused on appearances, this story whispers something simpler and more important. Sometimes being a hero just means believing someone before it's too late.